In the year 1453, the last Roman emperor died sword in hand at a shattered gate, defending a city that had stood as the capital of Christendom for over 11 centuries. His empire had outlived every rival that had ever threatened it, from Attila the Hun to the armies of the Prophet, only to fall at last to Ottoman cannons so massive they required 60 oxen to move. This is the story of Byzantium, and it is one of the most extraordinary stories ever lived. What follows is the complete journey, from the founding of a small Greek colony on the Bosphorus Strait in the 7th century before Christ, through the vision of Constantine, the genius of Justinian, the fires of holy war, the golden age of emperors who ruled half the known world, and the long, defiant twilight of a civilization that refused to vanish quietly. Along the way, we will walk through the daily lives of soldiers, monks, merchants, and empresses. We will witness the construction of the greatest dome ever raised, the invention of a weapon so secret its formula died with the empire, and the theological storms that tore a faith apart. Byzantium shaped the world we inhabit now. Its legal codes underpin European law. Its scholars carried the light of ancient Greece into the Renaissance. Its church still guides the spiritual lives of hundreds of millions. The double-headed eagle of its final dynasty flies on national flags to this day. If you enjoy complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week we bring you the full story of a world that shaped history. Let us begin where the waters narrow between two continents, where a handful of Greek sailors once saw a headland and decided to stay. A narrow channel of dark water catches the first light of morning. Mist lifts from the surface in pale ribbons, drifting between two continents that nearly touch. The Bosphorus stretches barely 700 meters wide at its narrowest point, a slender passage connecting the warm Mediterranean world to the vast Black Sea beyond. Currents run in two layers here, a surface flow pushing south towards the Sea of Marmara, a deeper countercurrent pulling north. And where these forces meet, the water churns with fish. Swordfish, bonito, and mackerel pass through in seasonal migrations so dense that ancient fishermen could harvest them with baskets. On the European shore, a triangular promontory juts eastward into the strait, sheltered on its southern flank by a deep natural inlet that curves inland like a horn. This is the geography that will shape 1,000 years of empire. But first it shapes a colony. Around 657 years before the Common Era, settlers from the Greek city of Megara cross the Aegean and plant a settlement on that promontory. They call it Byzantium. Ancient tradition holds that their leader, a man named Byzas, consulted the oracle at Delphi before departing and was told to settle opposite the land of the blind. When Byzas reached the Bosphorus and saw the colony of Chalcedon already established on the Asian shore, its founders having somehow overlooked the superior European promontory with its deep harbor and commanding heights, he understood the oracle's meaning. The Chalcedonians had been blind to the finest natural harbor in the ancient world. Byzantium grows steadily on the wealth of its position. Every merchant vessel passing between the grain fields of the Black Sea coast and the hungry cities of Greece must navigate this strait. The colony levies tolls. It trades salted fish, wine, and hides. Its acropolis rises on the promontory's highest ground, crowned with temples to Artemis and Poseidon. Stone walls ring the settlement, though the sea itself provides the strongest defense on two sides. For centuries, Byzantium endures as a prosperous but secondary city, buffeted by the ambitions of greater powers. Persian armies cross the Bosphorus on pontoon bridges during the campaigns of Darius and Xerxes. Alexander's Macedonian Empire absorbs the city without drama. Hellenistic kingdoms contest it. Through each transition, Byzantium survives by the same logic that created it. The strait must remain open, and whoever holds the promontory controls the strait. Rome arrives in the 2nd century before the Common Era, and Byzantium becomes a civitas foederata, a federated city allied to the Republic. It pays tribute, contributes ships, and retains limited autonomy. When civil war tears the Roman world apart in the late 2nd century of the Common Era, Byzantium makes a fatal miscalculation, supporting the losing claimant Pescennius Niger against Septimius Severus. Severus besieges the city for nearly 3 years before it falls in 196. He razes its walls and strips its privileges, though he later rebuilds on a grander scale, recognizing what geography had always declared. More than a century passes. The Roman Empire fractures and reunites, fractures again. In 324, a general named Constantine defeats his last rival, Licinius, at the Battle of Chrysopolis on the Asian shore of the Bosphorus. Standing on the promontory of Old Byzantium, Constantine surveys the same waters that Megarian colonists first crossed, nearly a millennium before. He sees what Byzas saw, the defensible triangle of land, the Golden Horn harbor capable of sheltering vast fleets, the convergence of roads from the Balkans and Anatolia, the strait commanding trade between 2 seas and 2 continents. Construction begins almost immediately. Workers lay foundations for massive new walls extending the city westward. A great hippodrome takes shape beside an imperial palace complex. Forums, colonnaded avenues, cisterns, and bathhouses rise from the rocky ground. Constantine orders columns, statues, and architectural fragments shipped from temples across the empire to adorn his creation. On the 11th of May, 330, the city is formally dedicated with pagan and Christian rites intertwined. It bears a new name, Nova Roma, though the world will call it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. The small Greek colony on the strait has become the eastern capital of the Roman world, and the currents of the Bosphorus now carry the weight of an empire. The city grows with astonishing speed. Within a decade of its dedication, Constantinople's population surges past 100,000 as settlers arrive from across the eastern provinces, drawn by imperial tax exemptions and free grain distributions modeled on Rome's own annona. Along the Mese, the great colonnaded avenue that runs from the Million Milestone near the palace to the western gates, shops and porticos multiply in marble and limestone. The Forum of Constantine stands at the avenue's first great bend, dominated by a towering porphyry column brought from Egypt, crowned with a bronze statue of the emperor himself, rendered in the likeness of the sun god Apollo. Beneath the column, according to tradition, lie sacred relics, fragments of the true cross, the baskets from the miracle of the loaves. The old and the new, pagan and Christian, coexist uneasily in every stone. Constantine does not live to see his capital fully realized. He dies on the 22nd of May, 337, baptized only on his deathbed. His sons divide the empire and turn on one another. Yet Constantinople endures, its importance growing with each succession crisis. Constantius II, ruling the East, commissions new churches and expands the imperial palace complex along the Sea of Marmara. The great palace becomes a labyrinth of reception halls, gardens, barracks, and chapels cascading down the hillside toward the water. Its chalker gate, sheathed in bronze, faces the Augustan Square where the Senate House, the Hagia Sophia, still a modest basilica in these early decades, and the public baths form the ceremonial heart of the city. The Hippodrome, expanded from an earlier structure, seats perhaps 40,000 spectators. Its central spine glitters with monuments looted from the ancient world. The serpent column from Delphi, commemorating the Greek victory over Persia nearly 9 centuries earlier, and an Egyptian obelisk of Thutmose III, raised on a carved marble base depicting the emperor presiding over the races. The chariot factions, the blues and the greens, are already becoming political forces, their loyalties shaping urban life for centuries to come. Emperor Julian, called the Apostate, briefly attempts to restore paganism in 361, but his reign lasts barely 2 years. The Christian trajectory of the empire proves irreversible. Under Valens, the Eastern Empire faces catastrophe at Adrianople in 378, where Gothic cavalry destroys a Roman army and kills the emperor himself. The disaster sends shockwaves through the empire, but Constantinople's walls hold firm. The Goths ravage Thrace yet cannot breach the capital. It falls to Theodosius I to restore order. A Spaniard by birth, he proves the most consequential emperor since Constantine. In 380, he issues the Edict of Thessalonica, declaring Nicene Christianity the sole legitimate religion of the Roman state. Pagan temples are closed. Sacrifices are forbidden. The ancient Olympic Games cease. In 381, the First Council of Constantinople affirms the Nicene Creed and elevates the Bishop of Constantinople to a position of honor second only to Rome, a decision that will shape Christian politics for a millennium. The city is no longer merely an administrative capital. It is becoming the spiritual center of Eastern Christendom. Theodosius also proves to be the last emperor to rule both halves of the Roman world. He defeats Western usurpers and briefly reunites the empire, but his health fails. On the 17th of January, 395, he dies in Milan. His will divides the empire permanently between his 2 sons, Arcadius in the east, Honorius in the west. No one at the time understands this as a final separation. The administrative machinery has been split before and reunited. But this time, the division holds. The Western court retreats to Ravenna. The Eastern court remains in Constantinople, where the population approaches 300,000 and the skyline bristles with domes and columns. The Mese hums with commerce, incense drifts from church doorways, imperial processions move through streets lined with silk hangings. The city that Constantine gambled upon has become the undisputed center of the surviving Roman world, and the faith he embraced now defines its identity entirely. The young Emperor Arcadius dies in 408, leaving the Eastern throne to his 7-year-old son Theodosius II. A regency governs in his name, and within its first years the administration undertakes what will prove to be the single most consequential building project in the empire's long history. In 413, the Praetorian prefect Anthemius orders the construction of a new land wall stretching from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn, roughly 1.5 kilometers west of the old Constantinian fortification. The city has outgrown its original boundaries. Entire neighborhoods sprawl beyond the old defenses. The new wall encloses them all. What rises from the Thracian earth is not a single barrier, but a layered killing ground of extraordinary sophistication. A broad outer moat, some 20 meters wide and several meters deep, forms the first obstacle. Behind it stands a low breastwork, then an outer wall perhaps 2 meters thick with towers at regular intervals. Beyond that stretches a terrace, the peribolos, swept by fire from the inner wall, which climbs to 12 meters in height and 5 meters in thickness, punctuated by 96 massive towers spaced roughly 55 meters apart. The entire system runs for approximately 6.5 kilometers. No army on Earth possesses the siege technology to breach it. For the next 1,000 years, these walls will define the western edge of Constantinople and turn the city into the most heavily fortified urban center in the medieval world. The walls prove their worth almost immediately. Attila the Hun sweeps across the Balkans in the 440s, devastating cities from Naissus to Thermopylae. His horsemen reach the outer suburbs of Constantinople itself, but the Theodosian walls hold without serious challenge. The empire pays enormous tribute, 6,000 pounds of gold in a single settlement, and Attila turns his attention westward, where the pickings seem easier and the defences far weaker. The Eastern court buys time with gold, and time proves more valuable than pride. Attila dies in 453, and his empire fragments overnight. Meanwhile, the western half disintegrates. Vandals sack Rome in 455. Germanic warlords carve the western provinces into successor kingdoms. In 476, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, is deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The event barely registers in Constantinople. The Eastern court considers itself the continuing Roman Empire, not a remnant, not a successor, but the thing itself. Latin remains the language of law and military command, even as Greek dominates the streets, the markets, and the liturgy. Emperor Leo I, who reigns from 457 to 474, strengthens the empire's independence from Germanic military influence by recruiting Isaurian mountaineers from southern Anatolia as a counterweight to Gothic generals. His successor Zeno navigates the treacherous politics of Ostrogothic ambition, redirecting Theodoric and his people toward Italy, solving an Eastern problem by creating a Western one. The theological disputes that will define Byzantine identity intensify during these decades. The Council of Chalcedon in 451 declares Christ to possess two natures, divine and human, in one person. Monophysite communities across Egypt and Syria reject this formula. The fracture between Chalcedonian orthodoxy and monophysite dissent will haunt the empire for centuries. Anastasius I ascends the throne in 491 and governs for 27 years with remarkable fiscal discipline. He abolishes the hated chrysogyron tax on urban trades, reforms the copper coinage, and tightens provincial administration until the imperial treasury accumulates a surplus of 320,000 pounds of gold. This staggering reserve will fund the ambitions of his successors. He strengthens the long walls of Thrace, a secondary defensive line some 65 kilometers west of Constantinople, adding depth to the capital's defenses. By the time Anastasius dies in 518, the Eastern Empire has accomplished something extraordinary. It has survived the century that destroyed its western twin. Its capital stands behind impregnable walls, its treasury overflows, its bureaucracy functions. Its church, though divided on theological questions, provides a unifying cultural framework from the Danube to the Euphrates. Monastic communities multiply across Anatolia and the Levant, copying manuscripts, tending the sick, preserving learning. The empire awaits only an emperor ambitious enough to spend the accumulated wealth and test the strength of its restored institutions against the wider world. That emperor arrives in 527. Justin I, an aging soldier of peasant origin, dies and leaves the throne to his nephew, a man who has been the true power behind the court for nearly a decade. Justinian I ascends at 45 years old, sharp-minded, tireless, and consumed by a vision of restoring the Roman Empire to its ancient grandeur. Beside him stands Theodora, a former actress from the Hippodrome factions, now empress, a woman of extraordinary political intelligence whose influence over policy, diplomacy, and even theology will prove decisive. Within 2 years, Justinian orders the most ambitious legal project in Roman history. A commission led by the jurist Tribonian begins compiling, editing, and systematizing over 1,000 years of Roman legal writings. By 534, the work is complete. The Corpus Juris Civilis, a vast body of law comprising the Codex, the Digest, the Institutes, and later the Novellae. It organizes Roman jurisprudence into a coherent system that will shape European legal thought for a millennium and beyond. But in January of 532, the capital nearly destroys itself. The Nika riots erupt from Hippodrome factions, escalating into a full insurrection that sets fire to much of the city center. Rioters crown a rival emperor. Justinian considers flight. It is Theodora who refuses to leave, and her resolve stiffens the court. The general Belisarius traps the rioters inside the Hippodrome. 30,000 die. The emperor's authority is restored, and from the ashes of the burned city rises his greatest monument. The old Church of Holy Wisdom, destroyed in the riots, is rebuilt on a scale no one has attempted. The architects Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus design a structure that defies convention. A dome spanning 31 meters floats 55 meters above the nave floor, resting on pendentives that transfer its weight to 4 massive piers. 40 windows ring the dome's base, flooding the interior with light so that the golden mosaics on the curved surfaces seem to dissolve the boundary between stone and heaven. When Justinian enters the completed Hagia Sophia on the 27th of December, 537, the interior shimmers with marble panels in green, white, and purple, with porphyry columns brought from Egyptian temples, with silver iconostasis screens and silk curtains. It is the largest enclosed space in the world. Meanwhile, Belisarius wages war across the Mediterranean. In 533, he sails to North Africa with a modest force and shatters the Vandal kingdom in 2 battles. The following year, Carthage is Roman again. In 535, imperial armies land in Sicily and push into Italy against the Ostrogoths. This war proves far longer and more brutal. The Gothic resistance drags on for nearly 20 years, devastating the Italian peninsula. By 554, Italy is reconquered. Imperial forces also seize a strip of southern Spain. The Mediterranean is, briefly, a Roman lake once more. Then catastrophe strikes from an invisible enemy. In 541, ships arriving from Egypt carry rats bearing plague. The disease sweeps through Constantinople with terrifying speed. At its peak, perhaps 5,000 people die each day. Bodies pile in towers and open pits. Justinian himself falls ill but survives. Across the empire, the plague kills perhaps a quarter of the population, gutting the tax base, depleting the armies, and weakening the agricultural economy for generations. The reconquered territories become impossible to hold at full strength. Justinian reigns until 565, spending his final years fortifying borders, building churches across the empire, and intervening in theological disputes between Chalcedonian and Miaphysite Christians. The empire he leaves behind stretches from Spain to Mesopotamia, governed by the most sophisticated legal code in the world, crowned by the most extraordinary building in Christendom. Yet the treasury is strained, the army is overstretched, and the plague returns in waves. The restored western provinces will prove impossible to defend. The seeds of the next century's crisis already lie buried in the exhausted soil of an empire that reached too far, built too grandly, and suffered a blow from nature that no walls or laws could withstand. The exhaustion Justinian left behind deepens under his successors. Justin II, who takes the throne in 565, inherits an empire whose frontiers span 3 continents, but whose armies lack the manpower to defend them. Within 3 years, the Lombards pour into Italy, seizing most of the peninsula that Justinian spent 2 decades reconquering. In the east, war with Sassanid Persia resumes. Justin suffers a mental collapse and hands power to his general Tiberius, who rules capably but briefly. Maurice, who succeeds him in 582, imposes fiscal discipline and achieves a favorable peace with Persia, even installing a friendly Shah on the Sassanid throne. But when Maurice orders his Danubian armies to winter north of the river in 602, the troops mutiny. A centurion named Phocas rides to Constantinople at the head of a rebel army. Maurice and his sons are executed on the shore of the Sea of Marmara. Phocas proves a tyrant. His 8-year reign destabilizes every frontier. The Sassanid Shah Khosrow II, claiming to avenge his benefactor Maurice, launches a total war against the empire. Persian armies sweep through Mesopotamia, Syria, and Palestine with a speed not seen since the campaigns of ancient Persia. In 614, Jerusalem falls. The true cross, Christendom's most sacred relic, is carried away to Ctesiphon. By 619, Egypt, the empire's breadbasket, is in Persian hands. Anatolia itself is raided. Persian soldiers camp on the Asian shore of the Bosphorus, visible from Constantinople's walls. In 610, Heraclius, son of the governor of Carthage, sails to Constantinople with a fleet, overthrows Phocas, and takes the purple. He inherits a state on the verge of annihilation. The treasury is empty. The Avars and Slavs press the Balkans. Persia holds half the empire's former territory. For over a decade, Heraclius can do little but survive. He melts church plate and strips gold from mosaics to pay soldiers. He negotiates with the Avars, buying time with tribute. Then, in 622, Heraclius gambles everything. He leaves Constantinople under the protection of its walls, and the Patriarch loads his army onto ships and sails to the eastern coast of Anatolia. From there he strikes into Armenia, bypassing the Persian armies occupying Syria and Egypt entirely. It is a campaign of extraordinary audacity. For 6 years Heraclius fights deep inside Persian territory, winning battle after battle through speed and tactical brilliance. In 626, the Persians and Avars coordinate a joint siege of Constantinople itself. The Theodosian walls hold on the landward side. The Byzantine navy destroys the Avar fleet in the Golden Horn. The city survives. In December of 627, Heraclius destroys the main Persian army near the ruins of ancient Nineveh. Khosrow is overthrown by his own nobles. Persia sues for peace. The True Cross returns to Jerusalem in 630. The empire appears restored. The triumph lasts barely 6 years. From the Arabian Peninsula, armies united under the banner of Islam erupt into the Levant with a force no one anticipates. At the Battle of Yarmouk in August of 636, the Byzantine field army in Syria is annihilated. Damascus falls. Jerusalem surrenders in 637. Egypt is lost by 642. North Africa follows. Within a single generation, the empire loses 2/3 of its territory and more than half its population and revenue. Constantinople itself faces direct assault. From 674 to 678, an Arab fleet blockades the city each summer, anchoring along the Sea of Marmara. The defenders deploy a terrifying new weapon, Greek fire, a liquid incendiary compound projected from bronze siphons mounted on warship prows. It burns on water. The Arab fleet is devastated, and a 30-year truce is secured. The empire that emerges from this century of catastrophe is fundamentally transformed. It is no longer a Mediterranean superpower governing diverse provinces from Spain to Egypt. It is a compact, Greek-speaking, fiercely Orthodox Christian state centered on Constantinople and the Anatolian Plateau, organized into military districts called themes, where soldier farmers hold land in exchange for hereditary military service. The old Roman Senate fades. Latin disappears from official use. The empire has been stripped to its core, and that core proves astonishingly resilient. That compact, resilient state now turns inward, and the wound it inflicts upon itself proves deeper than any siege. The crisis begins not with theology, but with ash. In 726, a volcanic eruption in the Aegean Sea between the islands of Thera and Thracia sends columns of pumice and steam into the sky. Emperor Leo III, a brilliant military commander who had repelled the Second Great Arab Siege of Constantinople just 9 years earlier, interprets the eruption as divine wrath. His conclusion is devastating in its simplicity. God is angry because Christians have fallen into idolatry. The icons, painted panels of Christ, the Virgin, and the saints displayed in every church, monastery, home, and marketplace across the empire are graven images forbidden by Scripture. They must be destroyed. The first act is symbolic and explosive. Imperial soldiers climb to the chalk gate, the ceremonial entrance to the great palace, and tear down the monumental icon of Christ that has hung there for generations. A crowd of women attacks the soldiers. One is killed. The removal sends shock waves through a society where icons are not mere decoration, but living presences, kissed, venerated, carried into battle, believed to weep and heal. For ordinary Byzantines, the icon is a window into heaven, a point where the divine touches the material world. To destroy it is to sever that connection. Leo issues formal edicts against icon veneration. Church walls across Constantinople are whitewashed. Mosaics depicting holy figures are scraped away or plastered over. Frescoes vanish beneath coats of lime. In their place appear crosses, geometric patterns, images of trees and birds, acceptable because they represent no human or divine form. Monasteries resist most fiercely. Monks are the primary producers and defenders of icons, and they command enormous moral authority among the common people. Leo responds with persecution. Monastic properties are confiscated. Monks are publicly humiliated, forced to parade through the hippodrome holding hands with women. Some are blinded, some are killed. The controversy is never purely theological. Iconoclasm serves imperial interests by breaking the independent power of monasteries, redirecting their vast landholdings and wealth toward the state and the military. The eastern provinces of Anatolia, where soldiers farm the harsh plateau and Islam's prohibition of images exerts cultural pressure, tend to support iconoclasm. The western provinces, Greece and southern Italy, where monastic networks are dense and popular piety centers on icon veneration, resist bitterly. The Patriarch of Constantinople is replaced when he opposes the emperor. The Pope in Rome condemns iconoclasm outright, deepening the rift between Eastern and Western Christendom. Leo's son, Constantine V, escalates the campaign after 741. He convenes a council in 754 that formally condemns icon veneration as heresy. His persecution of monks is savage. The monastery of Pellikitu is burned with its inhabitants inside. Yet Constantine is also a formidable military emperor who wins victories against Arabs and Bulgars, and his soldiers worship him. The army remains iconoclast, the monasteries remain iconodule. The first reversal comes through a woman. Empress Irene, ruling as regent for her young son Constantine VI, convenes the Second Council of Nicaea in 787. 350 bishops formally restore icon veneration, declaring that honor paid to an image passes to the prototype it represents. Irene then deposes and blinds her own son in 797 to rule alone as empress, the first woman to hold the Roman imperial title in her own name. Iconoclasm returns briefly under Leo V in 814, driven again by military emperors who associate image-breaking with battlefield success. But the theological arguments have been settled. When Emperor Theophilos dies in 842, his widow, Empress Theodora, acts as regent and moves decisively. On the first Sunday of Lent, March 11th, 843, a solemn procession carries restored icons through the streets of Constantinople and back into the Hagia Sophia. The event is proclaimed the Triumph of Orthodoxy, a feast the Eastern Orthodox Church celebrates to this day. Deep in the volcanic landscape of Cappadocia, where monks had carved churches into soft tufa rock and hidden icons in darkness through decades of persecution, painted faces of saints emerge again into lamplight. The empire's spiritual unity is restored, but at a cost. The iconoclast century has widened the gulf between Constantinople and Rome beyond repair. It has demonstrated that the emperor's power, however absolute, cannot reshape the faith of ordinary believers. And it has confirmed that in Byzantium, theology is never separate from politics. Every argument about the nature of a painted image is simultaneously an argument about the nature of imperial power itself. The empire that emerges from the iconoclast storm is leaner, harder, and hungry for expansion. Within a generation of the triumph of orthodoxy, a new dynasty seizes power, one that will preside over the most sustained period of military conquest and cultural brilliance since Justinian. The founder is an unlikely figure. Basil, an Armenian peasant from Thrace, arrives in Constantinople with nothing but physical strength and ambition. He catches the eye of Emperor Michael III, rises through court patronage, and in 867 murders his benefactor to claim the throne. The blood on his hands dries quickly. Basil I proves a capable administrator who stabilizes finances, reforms the legal code, and begins the slow work of pushing the empire's frontiers outward. He founds what historians call the Macedonian dynasty, though he himself hails from Armenian stock. His descendants will rule for nearly 2 centuries. The real military transformation begins under Nikephoros II Phocas, who takes the throne in 963. A gaunt ascetic general who sleeps on the floor of the imperial bedchamber, Nikephoros has already delivered the empire's most celebrated victory in generations, the reconquest of Crete in 961. That island, seized by Arab corsairs over a century earlier, had served as a base for raids that terrorized the Aegean. Its recovery reopens the eastern Mediterranean to Byzantine commerce. Nikephoros then turns east, capturing Tarsus, Aleppo, and in 969 the ancient city of Antioch, lost to the Arabs 3 centuries before. Byzantine cavalry rides through streets where Roman columns still stand. His successor, John I Tzimiskes, who seizes power through assassination in 969, pushes even further. Byzantine armies campaign deep into Syria and Palestine, reaching within striking distance of Jerusalem. The empire's eastern frontier extends further than at any point since the 7th century. Yet the supreme achievement belongs to Basil II, who ascends as a child emperor in 963 and does not die until 1025, a reign spanning half a century. His early years are consumed by civil wars against powerful military aristocrats, the very generals whose families had driven the reconquests. Basil crushes them with cold patience, confiscating their estates and breaking the power of the landed magnates who threatened central authority. Then he turns north toward Bulgaria. Tsar Samuel has rebuilt the Bulgarian Empire into a formidable state, stretching from the Danube to the Adriatic. Basil wages war against him for over 2 decades, methodical, relentless, grinding. The decisive blow falls at the Battle of Cladion in 1014. Basil captures approximately 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers and orders them blinded, leaving 1 man in every 100 with a single eye to lead the rest home. When Tsar Samuel sees his ruined army stumbling toward him, he collapses and dies within days. By 1018, the Bulgarian Empire ceases to exist. Basil earns the epithet Bulgaroktonos, the Bulgar slayer. At the height of his reign, Constantinople stands as the wealthiest city on earth. Its population approaches 500,000. The great palace complex sprawls across terraces above the Sea of Marmara, its throne room featuring a golden tree with mechanical singing birds and roaring bronze lions, devices designed to awe foreign ambassadors into submission. Along the Meuse, the great colonnaded avenue, regulated markets sell silk, spices, ivory, and metalwork under strict guild supervision. In monastery scriptoria, scholars copy and illuminate ancient Greek manuscripts, Plato, Aristotle, Homer, preserving texts that might otherwise vanish from human memory. Cloisonné enamel work reaches perfection, tiny cells of gold wire filled with glass paste in blues, greens, and crimsons that glow like stained glass held in the palm. Victorious armies return through the Golden Gate, the ceremonial entrance reserved for triumphal processions, its marble pylons gleaming in the Thracian sun. The empire stretches from southern Italy to the Euphrates, from the Crimea to Cyprus. The gold bezant remains the most trusted currency in the known world, accepted from Scandinavia to India. When Basil II dies in 1025, unmarried and childless, he leaves behind an empire at its absolute zenith, its treasury full, its borders secure, its cultural prestige unmatched. No one in Constantinople can imagine that within 50 years, a single afternoon on an Anatolian plateau will shatter everything this dynasty built. Behind the empire's armies and emperors lies a city unlike any other on earth. Constantinople at its zenith holds between 400,000 and 500,000 souls, making it the largest urban center in Christendom and the undisputed commercial capital of the medieval world. Its wealth is not accidental. It is engineered. The Mese, the great colonnaded avenue that runs from the Augusteion near Hagia Sophia westward to the Golden Gate, serves as the city's commercial spine. Beneath its covered porticos, merchants arrange goods in a sequence dictated not by chance, but by imperial regulation. The Book of the Eparch, compiled in the early 10th century under Leo VI, governs every aspect of trade. It specifies which guilds may sell which goods, where they may operate, what profit margins are permitted, and what penalties await those who hoard grain or adulterate silk. Perfumers must cluster near the Mese's eastern end so that pleasant scents greet visitors approaching the imperial quarter. Candle makers and tanners are pushed to the city's periphery. This is commerce under the watchful eye of the state, and the eparch, the city prefect, enforces it with fines, flogging, and expulsion from the guild. Silk defines Byzantine luxury and diplomacy alike. The imperial gynecea, state-controlled workshops, produce fabric reserved for the court and for diplomatic gifts. Since the mid-6th century, when silkworm eggs were smuggled from China, Byzantium has maintained its own sericulture. Raw thread spools onto wooden frames. Weavers work looms producing samite and brocade dyed in Tyrian purple, a color restricted by law to the imperial household. A bolt of purple silk sent to a foreign king carries more diplomatic weight than a regiment. The bezant, the gold solidus of Constantinople, circulates from the markets of Baghdad to the trading posts of Scandinavia. Its weight and purity remain virtually unchanged for 7 centuries, making it the most trusted currency in the known world. Viking traders who descend the Dnieper River to reach the Black Sea call Constantinople Miklagard, the Great City, and they come seeking gold coins, silk, and spices. In the Golden Horn, ships from Amalfi, Venice, Trebizond, and Cherson crowd the wharves. Customs officials levy the commercion, a 10% tax on imports and exports, filling the imperial treasury with steady revenue. Beyond the markets, the city sustains a literate culture unmatched in medieval Europe. The Imperial University, refounded under Constantine the IX Monomachos in 1045, teaches philosophy, law, and rhetoric. Monastic scriptoria, especially those on Mount Athos, where communities of monks have gathered since the mid-10th century, copy manuscripts of Aristotle, Plato, Thucydides, and the Church Fathers onto vellum with iron gall ink and gold leaf illumination. These copies will one day prove essential to the survival of classical knowledge. Women in Byzantine society occupy a position more legally defined than in most contemporary civilizations. They can own property, inherit estates, and initiate divorce under specific circumstances codified in the Basilica, the legal compendium revised under Leo VI. Empresses like Theodora and Irene have wielded supreme authority. Aristocratic women manage large households, commission religious art, and found monasteries. Yet public life remains overwhelmingly male, and the gynaeconitis, the women's quarters, defines domestic architecture. Eunuchs hold a distinctive place in the administrative hierarchy. Barred from the throne itself, they are trusted precisely because they cannot found dynasties. They serve as chamberlains, generals, patriarchal advisors, and provincial governors. The parakoimomenos, the emperor's chief attendant, is often the most powerful figure at court after the emperor himself. In humbler quarters, oil lamps flicker over mosaic floors in modest geometric patterns. Bread, olives, fish, cheese, and wine form the daily diet. Public baths remain in use, a continuity from Roman tradition long vanished in the West. The hippodrome still hosts chariot races, though the old factional violence of the blues and greens has faded into civic pageantry. This is a city where a merchant can purchase Chinese porcelain, Indian pepper, Russian furs, and African ivory within a single afternoon's walk. Its harbors, its walls, its regulated markets, and its educated bureaucracy form an integrated system of wealth generation that no contemporary state can rival. The empire's strength has never rested on military power alone. It rests here in the looms, the ledgers, the scriptoria, and the golden coins that bear the face of Christ on one side and the emperor on the other. Basil II dies on the 15th of December, 1025, and with him dies the discipline that held the empire at its peak. He leaves no heir of his body. The throne passes to his aged brother Constantine the Great, then to a succession of emperors connected by marriage, court intrigue, and palace conspiracy, rather than by military competence or administrative vision. In the half-century between 1025 and 1081, more than a dozen rulers occupy the throne. Some reign for months. Civil aristocrats and eunuch ministers dominate the court, systematically dismantling the military structures that Basil spent 50 years perfecting. The damage is precise and catastrophic. The thematic armies of Anatolia, those provincial soldier farmers who held land in exchange for hereditary military service, find their obligations commuted to cash payments. The funds vanish into the capital's bureaucratic apparatus. Frontier fortifications fall into disrepair. Professional tagmata regiments shrink as budgets redirect toward court luxury and civilian patronage networks. Emperor Constantine the IX Monomachos, reigning from 1042 to 1055, disbands the 50,000-strong Armenian frontier army entirely, replacing a living shield with nothing. Across the eastern border, a new power gathers momentum. The Seljuk Turks, originally Central Asian steppe nomads who converted to Sunni Islam, have swept westward through Persia and seized Baghdad in 1055. Their sultan, Tughril Beg, receives the caliph's blessing as temporal protector of the faithful. Turkoman raiding bands begin probing Byzantine Armenia and eastern Anatolia, burning harvests, scattering populations, testing defenses that no longer hold. By 1071, Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes resolves to confront the threat directly. He assembles a large but unreliable army, perhaps 40,000 men drawn from depleted thematic troops, foreign mercenaries including Normans and Franks, and Turkic auxiliaries of questionable loyalty. He marches east toward the fortress town of Manzikert near Lake Van. On the 26th of August, 1071, He meets Sultan Alp Arslan's Seljuk cavalry on the open plateau. The battle unfolds as a study in disintegration. Andronikos Doukas, commanding the reserve and harboring dynastic ambitions, withdraws his forces at the critical moment. The Turkic mercenaries defect. The Norman contingent has already been detached and defeated separately. Romanos fights with personal courage, but finds himself encircled. By nightfall, the emperor of the Romans is a prisoner in the Sultan's tent, the first Roman emperor captured by a Muslim commander in history. Alp Arslan's terms prove surprisingly moderate. He demands a ransom, an annual tribute, and certain border fortresses. But the treaty becomes meaningless within weeks. A palace coup in Constantinople deposes Romanos in absentia. He is blinded with such brutality that he dies of his wounds in 1072. The Doukas faction seizes power, and civil war consumes the empire's remaining military capacity. It is this civil war, more than Manzikert itself, that destroys Byzantine Anatolia. Rival claimants invite Turkoman war bands as allies. Once inside the plateau's vast interior, these nomadic groups never leave. They settle the grasslands, displacing Greek-speaking Christian farmers. Within a generation, central Anatolia transforms from the empire's heartland into the Sultanate of Rome, as the Turks themselves call it, acknowledging whose land they have taken. The empire loses its primary source of grain, manpower, and military recruitment in a single catastrophic generation. Constantinople still stands behind its walls. The capital's markets still function, but the body behind the head is withering. In 1081, a young military aristocrat named Alexios Komnenos seizes the throne through yet another coup, but this time the usurper proves equal to the crisis. Alexios I inherits an empire reduced to the coastlands of Anatolia, the Balkans under Norman and Pecheneг pressure, and a treasury stripped bare. He rebuilds through diplomacy, tactical brilliance, and a fateful decision. In 1095, he sends envoys to Pope Urban II, requesting Western mercenaries to help reconquer Anatolia. What arrives in 1097 is something Alexios never requested. Entire armies of crusaders, tens of thousands of Western knights and infantry marching toward Jerusalem, passing through Constantinople with ambitions far exceeding mercenary service. Alexios extracts oaths of fealty and channels them across the Bosphorus. The Crusaders capture Nicaea and Antioch, but the territories recovered serve Crusader ambitions more than Byzantine restoration. The empire has summoned a force it cannot control, and the consequences will echo for centuries. Alexios I spends the remaining 2 decades of his reign managing the volatile relationship between Byzantium and the Crusader, states that now dot the Levantine coast. The county of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the county of Tripoli, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem form a chain of Latin territories that owe theoretical allegiance to Constantinople but act with fierce independence. Alexios recovers portions of western Anatolia, pushing the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum back from the Aegean coastline and re-establishing imperial authority over key cities like Smyrna and Ephesus. He rebuilds the army not around the old thematic levies, which Manzikert destroyed, but around a professional force of mercenaries, foreign auxiliaries, and elite household units bound by personal loyalty. When he dies in 1118, the empire is no longer collapsing. It is breathing again. His son John II Komnenos inherits a stabilized realm and proves himself perhaps the finest soldier emperor since Basil II. Quiet, disciplined, and incorruptible, John campaigns almost every year of his 25-year reign. He secures the Danube frontier against Pecheneg and Hungarian pressure, then turns east. His armies march into Cilicia, recapturing fortresses from the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia and forcing Raymond of Poitiers, Prince of Antioch, to acknowledge Byzantine suzerainty in 1138. John enters Antioch in a ceremonial procession, the Crusader prince walking beside his horse on foot, a deliberate display of imperial hierarchy. He plans a grand campaign to recover the Holy Land under Byzantine leadership, but dies in 1143 from a hunting wound, possibly from a poisoned arrow. Manuel I Komnenos, John's youngest son, takes the throne and pursues the most ambitious foreign policy of any 12th century ruler. Charismatic, physically imposing, and fascinated by Western culture, Manuel engages simultaneously on every front. He intervenes in the Italian peninsula against the Norman Kingdom of Sicily, forms alliances with the German Emperor and the Hungarian crown, and attempts to reassert control over the Crusader states. Constantinople under Manuel becomes the most cosmopolitan city in the Mediterranean world. Italian merchants, Venetians, Genoese, Pisans, maintain permanent quarters along the Golden Horn, their warehouses packed with Eastern spices, silk, and precious metals. The Venetians alone enjoy trading privileges granted since 1082, exempting them from customs duties throughout the empire, a concession that enriches Venice enormously while draining Byzantine commercial revenue. Manuel's court dazzles foreign visitors. Western knights participate in tournaments held in the Hippodrome. Byzantine diplomats exchange gifts of silk, reliquaries, and illuminated manuscripts with every court from England to Egypt. The imperial army fields heavily armored cataphract cavalry alongside Cuman horse archers, Norman heavy infantry, and Turkish auxiliaries, a multinational force reflecting the empire's position between civilizations. Yet Manuel overreaches. In 1176, he leads a massive army into the interior of Anatolia to destroy the Seljuk capital at Iconium. At the mountain pass of Myriokephalon on September 17th, the Seljuk Sultan Kilij Arslan II ambushes the Byzantine column. The narrow defile turns into a killing ground. Manuel's siege equipment is destroyed, his army mauled. He retreats, and Anatolia's interior remains permanently beyond recovery. Manuel himself compares the defeat to Manzikert. When Manuel dies in 1180, the dynasty's grip loosens immediately. His son Alexios II, a child, cannot hold power. A regency collapses into conspiracy. In 1182, Andronikos I Komnenos, Manuel's cousin, marches on Constantinople. The city's populace, resentful of the Italian merchant communities whose privileges have bred deep hostility, erupts in a massacre of the Latin residents. Thousands of Venetians, Genoese, and Pisans are killed, their quarter burned. Andronikos seizes the throne, murders the young Alexios, and rules through terror until his own overthrow and gruesome public execution in 1185. The Komnenian century ends in blood. The empire Manuel left behind remains the Eastern Mediterranean's greatest power, but the massacre of 1182 has planted a seed of Latin vengeance that will bear catastrophic fruit within 2 decades. The dynasty that replaces the Komnenoi inherits a throne soaked in violence. The Angeloi emperors, Isaac II, and then his brother Alexios III, who blinds and deposes him in 1195, and preside over an empire hemorrhaging territory and credibility. Provincial governors ignore Constantinople. The treasury empties. The fleet, once the empire's shield, rots in its harbors. Norman Sicily raids the Aegean. Bulgarian and Serbian lords carve independent states from former imperial provinces. Into this vacuum of authority comes a force no Byzantine strategist anticipated. A Western crusade aimed not at Jerusalem, but at Constantinople itself. The Fourth Crusade assembles in Venice in 1202. Its leaders have contracted with Doge Enrico Dandolo for transport ships they cannot afford. Venice, still burning with resentment over the massacre of its citizens 20 years earlier, offers a solution. The Crusaders will first attack Zara, a Christian city on the Dalmatian coast that Venice covets. Pope Innocent III excommunicates the entire expedition, but the army sails regardless. Then a more fateful diversion presents itself. Alexios Angelos, son of the blinded Isaac II, appears in the Crusader camp promising vast payments, military support for the Holy Land, and reunion of the Orthodox Church with Rome, if the Crusaders will restore his father to the Byzantine throne. The fleet arrives before Constantinople in June of 1203. The city's inhabitants watch from the sea walls as hundreds of Venetian galleys and transport ships fill the Sea of Marmara. On the 17th of July, the Crusaders breach the sea walls along the Golden Horn in a combined naval and land assault. Alexios III flees the capital in the night. Isaac II is restored, his son crowned as co-emperor Alexios IV. But the promised payments never materialize. The treasury is bare. Relations between the Crusaders camped outside the walls and the Greek populace inside deteriorate through the winter. A fire set during skirmishes in August destroys entire neighborhoods. In January of 1204, a palace coup overthrows and kills both Isaac and Alexios IV. A new emperor, Alexios V Ducas, takes power and defies the Crusaders openly. On the 13th of April, 1204, the assault comes. Venetian ships lash themselves together in pairs, extending scaling ladders from their masts to the tops of the sea walls along the Golden Horn. Soldiers pour over the ramparts. The defense collapses. What follows is 3 days of systematic pillage unprecedented in medieval Christendom. Crusaders strip the Hagia Sophia of its silver iconostasis, its silk hangings, its sacred relics. The 4 gilded bronze horses that have stood in the hippodrome since antiquity are torn down and shipped to Venice. Libraries burn, reliquaries are melted for their gold. Nuns are violated in their convents. The accumulated artistic and intellectual wealth of 8 centuries vanishes into the holds of Venetian galleys or dissolves in flames. The conquerors partition the empire. Baldwin of Flanders is crowned Latin emperor in the Hagia Sophia. Venice claims 3/8 of Constantinople, Crete, and key Aegean ports. Crusader lords carve feudal principalities across Greece. But Byzantine resistance crystallizes immediately. Theodore Lascaris establishes the Empire of Nicaea across the strait in western Anatolia. The Komnenoi found the Empire of Trebizond on the Black Sea coast. The Despotate of Epirus forms in northwestern Greece. Of these successor states, Nicaea proves the most viable, inheriting the bureaucratic tradition, the Orthodox Patriarchate, and the military manpower of Anatolia. For 57 years, Nicaea nurtures the dream of reconquest. Its emperors, the Lascarids, and then Michael VIII Palaiologos build a disciplined state, forge alliances with Genoa against Venice, and wait. The Latin Empire weakens steadily, its territory shrinking to little more than Constantinople itself. On the 25th of July, 1261, a small Nicaean force under General Alexios Strategopoulos finds the city's garrison absent on a raiding expedition. They enter through a passage in the walls. By morning, Constantinople is Byzantine again. Michael VIII walks barefoot through the Golden Gate, an icon of the Virgin carried before him. The city he reclaims is a ruin, its population fallen to perhaps 35,000, its palaces gutted, its treasures gone. The empire lives, but the wound of 1204 has severed something irreplaceable. The wealth, the manuscripts, the sacred objects, the trust between Eastern and Western Christendom, none of it will return. Michael VIII. Palaiologos rules a city of ghosts. Constantinople in the 1260s is a landscape of absence. Entire neighborhoods stand empty, their roofs collapsed, their courtyards overtaken by fig trees and wild grasses. The great forums that once held hundreds of thousands now echo with the footsteps of a population numbering perhaps 35 to 50,000. Between the crumbling shells of aristocratic mansions, vegetable gardens spread where marble floors once gleamed. The Blachernai Palace in the northwest corner of the city becomes the primary imperial residence, its walls patched and reinforced, because the old Great Palace complex near the Hippodrome has deteriorated beyond practical use. The emperor who reclaimed this capital understands that holding it will demand every ounce of diplomatic cunning he possesses. Michael VIII proves equal to the challenge, though the cost is enormous. He rebuilds sections of the sea walls, restores churches, and repopulates neighborhoods by relocating families from provincial towns. He grants sweeping commercial privileges to Genoa in exchange for naval support, creating a rival to Venetian dominance that will haunt Byzantine commerce for generations. The Genoese establish themselves across the Golden Horn in Galata, where their trading colony soon generates more customs revenue than Constantinople itself. To secure his western flank, Michael pursues union with the Roman Church at the Second Council of Lyon in 1274, accepting papal supremacy in exchange for protection against Charles of Anjou's planned invasion. The union is deeply unpopular. Monks, clergy, and ordinary citizens reject it with fury. Michael enforces compliance through imprisonment and mutilation of dissenters, fracturing the very society he seeks to preserve. When Michael dies in 1282, his son Andronikos II inherits an empire stretched impossibly thin. The new emperor immediately repudiates the church union, restoring Orthodox independence, but losing any hope of sustained Western military aid. More critically, Andronikos dismantles the Byzantine navy to save money, relying instead on Genoese ships for maritime defense. This decision surrenders control of the Aegean and leaves the empire dependent on a foreign power for its most basic strategic needs. In Anatolia, the situation deteriorates beyond recovery. Turkish beyliks, small warrior principalities, carve up what remains of Byzantine territory. Among them, in the hills of Bithynia near the frontier, a chieftain named Osman founds around 1299 the beylik that will bear his name, the Ottomans. The dynasty tears itself apart. In 1321, Andronikos III revolts against his grandfather. Civil war consumes the empire for 7 years until the elder Andronikos is forced into a monastery in 1328. The younger Andronikos rules capably with his chief minister John Cantacuzénos, but dies unexpectedly in 1341, leaving a 9-year-old heir. Cantacuzénos claims the regency. The empress mother resists. A second, far more devastating civil war erupts, lasting from 1341 to 1347. Both sides invite foreign powers onto Byzantine soil. Cantacuzénos calls upon the Ottoman emir Orhan, who sends thousands of Turkish warriors into Thrace. Serbian King Stefan Dušan exploits the chaos to conquer Macedonia, Epirus, and Thessaly, crowning himself Emperor of Serbs and Greeks in 1346. The Black Death arrives in 1347, carried by merchant ships into Constantinople's depleted harbour. It kills perhaps a third of the remaining population across Byzantine territories. Cantacuzénos wins the civil war, but rules a wasteland. He abdicates in 1354, the same year Ottoman forces seize the fortress of Gallipoli on the European shore of the Dardanelles. It is the first permanent Ottoman foothold in Europe. Turkish settlers begin crossing into Thrace in growing numbers. Meanwhile, at the Chora Church in Constantinople, the scholar and statesman Theodore Metochites has already commissioned one of the supreme artistic achievements of the Byzantine world. Mosaics and frescoes of extraordinary refinement cover the walls and domes, luminous figures moving against gold backgrounds with a naturalism that anticipates the Italian Renaissance. This flowering of art amid political collapse captures something essential about the Paleologian age, a civilization producing its most beautiful work even as its political body fails. On the 26th of September, 1371, Ottoman forces annihilate a Serbian coalition at the Battle of Maritsa. The Balkans lie open. The Ottoman frontier now presses against Constantinople from every direction except the sea. The noose draws tight with terrifying speed. Within 2 decades of Maritsa, the Ottoman Sultan Murad I has reduced every Balkan Christian state to vassalage or ruin. On the 15th of June, 1389, the armies meet on the Field of Blackbirds. Kosovo Polja, where a coalition of Serbian, Bosnian, and Albanian forces makes its final stand. Both Sultan Murad and Serbian Prince Lazar die on the field, but the Ottoman military machine absorbs the blow and continues. Serbia becomes a vassal state. The Byzantine Emperor, now John V Palaiologos, has already submitted, travelling to the Ottoman court, providing military contingents for Ottoman campaigns, watching his own son Manuel serve as a hostage at the Sultan's side. The humiliation is total. Constantinople still stands, its ancient walls intact, but the empire it commands has shrunk to the city itself, a strip of Thracian coastline, a few Aegean islands, and the despotate of the Morea in the Peloponnese. The emperor rules at Ottoman pleasure. When John V attempts to strengthen the city's fortifications along the Golden Gate in 1390, the new Sultan Bayezid I, called the Thunderbolt, orders him to demolish the new works immediately. He complies. Western Christendom stirs briefly. In 1396, a grand crusading army assembles under King Sigismund of Hungary, French, Burgundian, German, and Hungarian knights riding east to break Ottoman power. At Nicopolis on the Danube, on the 25th of September, Bayezid annihilates them. The flower of French chivalry falls or is captured. Ransoms drain Western treasuries. No major crusade will be attempted for another half-century. Bayezid now blockades Constantinople directly, squeezing the city between 1394 and 1402. Starvation creeps through the streets. Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos embarks on an extraordinary journey westward, visiting Venice, Paris, and London, appearing before King Henry IV of England at Christmas 1400. European courts receive him with honor and fascination, but offer little beyond sympathy and modest funds. The purple robes of a Roman emperor are now the costume of a supplicant. Then salvation arrives from an unexpected quarter. The Central Asian conqueror Timur, sweeping westward with his vast armies, clashes with Bayezid over control of Anatolian beyliks. On the 20th of July, 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, Timur destroys the Ottoman army and captures Bayezid himself, who dies in captivity. The Ottoman state fractures into civil war among Bayezid's sons, a decade of chaos known as the Ottoman Interregnum. Constantinople breathes again. Manuel recovers fragments of coastline and a few Thracian towns. But the reprieve is temporary. By 1413, Mehmed I reunifies the Ottoman state. His son Murad II resumes pressure, besieging Constantinople in 1422 with cannon that crack but cannot breach the Theodosian walls. The city holds barely. Manuel II dies in 1425, a monk at the end, having outlived his own despair. His son John VIII Palaiologos inherits a realm that exists only because Ottoman sultans have not yet committed their full strength against it. John VIII makes one final gamble. In 1438 he travels to Italy, attending the Council of Ferrara-Florence, where Byzantine and Roman theologians negotiate the reunion of the Eastern and Western churches. On the 6th of July, 1439, the decree of union is signed. Pisanello captures the emperor's profile in a famous medal, the sharp features beneath a tall, domed hat, a face carved by exhaustion and resolve. But when the decree reaches Constantinople, the populace rejects it with fury. The Grand Duke Lucas Notarus reportedly declares he would rather see the Ottoman turban in the city than the Latin mitre. No Western army materializes. Murad II crushes the last crusade of Varna on the 10th of November, 1444, killing the young King Vladislav of Poland and Hungary on the battlefield. A second Ottoman victory at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448 eliminates the final organized Christian resistance in the Balkans. John VIII dies on the 31st of October, 1448, broken and childless. His brother Constantine ascends as Constantine XI, the last emperor. Across the Bosphorus, the young Ottoman prince Mehmed, just 16 years old, is already dreaming of the city. In 1452, he orders the construction of Rumeli Hisari, a massive fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus, just 8 kilometers north of Constantinople. Its walls rise in 4 months, cutting the city's access to Black Sea grain. The throat of the strait now belongs to the Ottomans. The ancient capital stands alone, encircled, awaiting the blow that everyone knows is coming. The cannon arrives in early spring. Cast at Adrianople by the Hungarian engineer Urban, the great bombard measures over 8 meters in length and requires 60 oxen and 200 men to drag it across Thrace. Its stone projectiles weigh more than 500 kilograms each. It can fire only 7 times a day, and each blast shakes the earth for kilometers. Sultan Mehmed II has assembled the largest siege train the medieval world has ever seen. 14 batteries of artillery, some smaller, some enormous, all aimed at a single purpose. Behind the guns, an army of perhaps 80,000 troops gathers on the plains west of Constantinople. Against them stand roughly 7,000 defenders, a mix of Byzantine soldiers, Venetian sailors, and a company of 700 Genoese professionals under the command of Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a specialist in fortification defense whom Constantine the 11th has placed in charge of the land walls. On the 6th of April, 1453, the bombardment begins. The Great Bombard targets the weakest section of the Theodosian walls, the Mesoteichion, the low-lying stretch near the gate of St. Romanus, where the Lycus River passes beneath the fortifications. Day after day, stone balls slam into the outer wall, crumbling masonry that has stood for 1,000 years. Each night, the defenders work frantically to repair the breaches, filling gaps with barrels of earth, timber beams, and rubble. Giustiniani directs these repairs with relentless discipline, and for weeks the patched walls hold. At sea, the great iron chain still stretches across the mouth of the Golden Horn, blocking the Ottoman fleet from entering the harbour. On the 20th of April, Mehmed executes one of the most audacious manoeuvres in military history. His engineers construct a road of greased wooden logs over the hill behind the Genoese colony of Galata. Under cover of darkness, some 70 Ottoman ships are hauled overland, sails furled, hulls sliding on animal fat, and launched into the Golden Horn from the north. By dawn, the defenders stare in disbelief at an Ottoman fleet floating inside their protected harbour. The chain is now irrelevant. Constantinople must defend its sea walls as well, stretching an already desperate garrison even thinner. Through late April and May, Mehmed orders assault after assault. On the 18th of April, a major infantry attack against the Mesoteichion is repulsed with heavy Ottoman losses. Ottoman sappers dig tunnels beneath the walls, but a Scottish engineer named Johannes Grant detects them through vibrations in bowls of water placed on the ground, and the defenders countermined, flooding and collapsing the tunnels. A massive siege tower is rolled forward and burned by the defenders. Every Ottoman stratagem meets determined resistance, yet time favors the besiegers. The defenders cannot replace their losses. Giustiniani's men fight without rest. Food supplies dwindle. No relief fleet appears from the west. On the 28th of May, Mehmed orders a final general assault for dawn the following morning. That evening, the last Christian liturgy is celebrated in the Hagia Sophia, Orthodox and Catholic worshipping together for the first and last time in the great church. Constantine the 11th rides along the walls through the night, inspecting his positions. The assault begins in the early hours of the 29th of May. Mehmed sends irregular troops first, then Anatolian infantry, exhausting the defenders before committing his elite janissaries. The fighting at the Mesoteichion is ferocious. Then disaster strikes. Giustiniani takes a crossbow bolt or arquebus shot through his breastplate. Gravely wounded, he is carried to a Genoese ship. His withdrawal demoralizes the defense. Almost simultaneously, a small Ottoman force discovers the Kirka Porta, a minor postern gate left unlocked, and pours through. Janissaries scale the damaged walls. The defense collapses. Constantine the 11th strips off his imperial regalia and charges into the fighting at the breach. He is never seen again. Later accounts claim his body was identified only by the purple boots and the eagle embroidered on his stockings. The last Roman emperor dies as a common soldier, anonymous in the carnage. By afternoon, Mehmed II rides through the shattered gates. He proceeds directly to the Hagia Sophia, where he orders the building converted into a mosque. He strikes the floor with his hand, marveling at the dome above. The city that Constantine the Great founded 1123 years earlier now belongs to a new sovereign. The Ottoman Sultan gazes across the rooftops of his conquest and speaks a Persian couplet about the spider spinning its web in the palace of the emperors. The 1,000-year empire has ended in a single morning of blood and fire. The empire is dead, but its afterlife begins immediately. In the weeks following the fall, Greek scholars who had already begun migrating westward accelerate their departure. Men like Bessarion, the cardinal who had championed union at Florence, carry with them manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, Thucydides, and Ptolemy, texts preserved for centuries in Byzantine scriptoria, now finding new readers in Italian universities. Bessarion donates his personal library of some 750 manuscripts to Venice in 1468, forming the nucleus of the Bibliotheca Marciana. In Florence, the Greek émigré Demetrios Chalkokondyles teaches Homer at the university. The knowledge these scholars carry does not create the Renaissance single-handedly, but it provides essential fuel, original Greek texts that Latin Europe had known only through Arabic intermediaries or incomplete translations. The last political fragments of Byzantium flicker out within a decade. The despotate of the Morea falls to Mehmed II in 1460. The Empire of Trebizond, that remote Pontic outpost ruled by the Komnenoi's descendants, surrenders in 1461. Its emperor David is executed 2 years later. The imperial bloodline scatters across Europe. Yet the empire's deepest vessel of continuity is not political, but spiritual. The Orthodox Church survives intact under Ottoman rule. The ecumenical patriarch remains in Constantinople, governing Christian communities through the millet system. Byzantine liturgy, hymnography, and iconographic tradition continue unbroken in every Orthodox land. In Moscow, this inheritance takes on political dimensions. Ivan III marries Sophia Palaiologina, niece of the last emperor, in 1472. He adopts the double-headed eagle as his state emblem. The monk Philophe of Pskov articulates the doctrine of Moscow as the Third Rome. The first Rome fell to heresy, the second to the Turks, and the third stands eternal. Russian Orthodox cathedrals rise with onion domes that echo, however distantly, the pendentive engineering of the Hagia Sophia. The Ottomans themselves become Byzantium's most intimate inheritors. Mehmed II styles himself Caesari Rum, Caesar of Rome. Ottoman court ceremony absorbs Byzantine protocols of prostration and hierarchical display. The administrative division of provinces, the use of elaborate chancery practices, the very concept of a universal empire centered on Constantinople, all carry Byzantine DNA. The great Ottoman mosques designed by Sinan in the 16th century engage in direct architectural dialogue with the Hagia Sophia, their cascading domes and half-domes answering the challenge Anthemios and Isidoros posed 1,000 years earlier. Byzantine law proves equally enduring. The Corpus Juris Civilis, Justinian's monumental codification, had already shaped medieval Western legal thought through the law schools of Bologna. It becomes foundational to the civil law tradition that governs most of continental Europe, Latin America, and significant portions of Asia and Africa. Concepts of legal codification, the distinction between public and private law, principles of contract and property, all trace lineage to Byzantine legal scholarship. In modern Istanbul, the Theodosian walls still stretch from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn, their brick and limestone courses weathered, but standing after 16 centuries. Beneath the streets, Byzantine cisterns hold their columns in darkness. The Hagia Sophia itself has passed through transformations that mirror the contested nature of this legacy. Mosque under the Ottomans, museum under Ataturk in 1934, mosque again in 2020. Each change renews global debate about who owns the inheritance of Byzantium. The double-headed eagle flies today on the flags and coats of arms of Albania, Serbia, Montenegro, and Russia. Byzantine chant echoes in Orthodox churches from Tbilisi to Thessaloniki. Scholars continue excavating the layers of Constantinople beneath modern Istanbul, recovering mosaics, coins, and foundations that add texture to a civilization too often reduced to a footnote between Rome and the Renaissance. Byzantium endured for 11 centuries not through military dominance alone, but through the resilience of its institutions, the sophistication of its culture, and the adaptability of its faith. Its political body perished on a May morning, but its spirit proved beyond the reach of any conqueror's sword. Thank you for following this journey through the 1,000-year story of Byzantium. If these chapters have deepened your understanding of this extraordinary civilization, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss a new exploration of history's greatest stories.